Okay. Having had this good question about Helen and the use of RSP with respect to the Canada Child Benefits, good, because it's actually a topic that I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk about today. It's a nice one to bring into a question because it gives you actually, in a scenario like this, a good answer to a question that's very sort of mechanical and pretty easy, honestly, to deal with. And I think, Sharon, it was you who suggested that by contributing to an RRSP, Helen would have a larger Canada Child Benefit. That's right. And I find this is something that is often overlooked in these scenarios, but it's a very material outcome. Now, don't worry about percentages and amounts. It's just like I said on day one, you kind of just have to recognize where the income levels are, right? So TFSA doesn't help with that, Sharon, right? So RSP creates a tax deduction. And this is where looking at the tax return like we did yesterday is helpful. A tax deduction reduces your net income. And therefore, it increases your CCB calculation. Okay, but TFSA does not help with that. That's good. In general, when we look at any income item, now this is not just for Helen, okay? But in general, your net income impacts, there's two big ones that it impacts. It's going to impact your OAS clawback, and it's going to impact your Canada Child Benefit calculation. There are some other things as well. For example, it would impact your rate of CDSG. We talked about that a few minutes ago. It would impact your rate of CESG. So those are both relevant, but they're smaller items and it's harder to hit the right thresholds there. It would impact, to some extent, your GIS, although again, it's hard to manipulate that one. Okay. This is not going to be a great answer. I would generally stay away from GIS. Then we want to look at the things that have a disproportionate impact on net income. I did point this out yesterday, but if I have a business owner who takes dividend income, it's the grossed up amount that influences your net income. So if you're looking at somebody who's taking $1,000 of dividend, well, really, if it's non-eligible dividend, we take that times 1.15 for a non-eligible or ineligible dividend. That's going to have an $1,150 impact on any net income calculation. Is everybody with me there? Do you see how this has a way of kind of creeping into all kinds of questions? It's the kind of thing that if you're aware of it, you have lots of opportunity on the exam. There will be many questions on the exam that that give you a chance to play around with this. But if you ignore this, it will cause you problems on the exam. Okay. That's good. I did put it on the memorized list, Connor. I don't know. It's an easy number, 15% or 38%. It's not too bad. It's not like you're memorizing pages and pages of information, right? Sorry, Cameron, I'm not sure what your question is here. Did I delete this prematurely? Sorry, Cameron, I'm not following the question. Are you asking about question 17? Right, so any item that would be relevant to her to help her make a decision about whether any dollar she invests goes into TFSA or RRSP. Okay. And it does say invest first in one of those accounts. So she has a limited number of dollars to invest. Where is she going to put that limited number of dollars? Okay. Now, Boston, do you mind if we use your question 18 since you were good enough to share it here? And I feel like this is where your technical proficiency will pay off, because this question is a lot more focused on that technical side, right? We'll see here. I don't know. I don't know if you'll have too much to learn. We'll find out. Okay, first off, this question is maybe a little bit too mechanical. It doesn't pertain to the case study enough for my liking, and it's hard to get it to attach back to anything that's specific to Helen. So maybe not an ideal question that way. Okay. First, RSP deduction limit as impacted by DPSP. Oh, sorry, what kind of question is this? Are we collection, analysis, recommendation? Yeah, I would actually say it's a collection question, but again, if you said analysis, you're probably fine. This is what is true. It's not a what if or what when scenario, but whichever, it's fine. Okay. Not recommendation though, right? We know it's not recommendation and we're not going to give a recommendation here. All right, first off, RSP deduction limit. And there is a key word here. What's the key word that we're looking for in this particular answer? And Boston has it in here. It's the PA. That's it. It's the PA that we really care about. The fact that there's a PA identified and it's identified clearly here. It's good and reduces RSP contribution room based on what happened in DPSP the year before. That is technically correct. That's as relevant as you're going to get with a question like this. So, yeah, I would give that mark. If you didn't say PA, but you explained how it worked, you're probably still okay. But when I see that PA in there, I say, yeah, that's perfect. This is somebody who did put in the technical effort required. Okay. What about the second answer? Yeah, I put that on my list of things to memorize, Connor. You may recall that was on the memorized list. Okay. Yeah, I think this is good though. Taxes, regular income. I think it's okay, Shelley. Okay. There's so few other choices, right? I would give this mark. Tax deferred growth, taxed on withdrawal. Yeah, it's hard to give this whole thing as a very comprehensive answer, but it's really these two items here that are key. The tax deferred growth, perfect, that's relevant, and taxed on withdrawal. Okay. Yeah, that's good, Alan. That's very similar to Boston's answer, I think. Okay. What about the form of income in retirement? Oh, I can tell you went through the Advocates material, didn't you? Okay. Because that's like straight off the table in the Advocates material, right? Which is fine. Well, it doesn't have to be monthly income, Melissa. It's not that it's too vague. It's not necessarily correct, right? Because you could just wait till year end and take your minimum withdrawals out each year. Okay. And it's the RPP thing that triggered me there, Boston, right? Because that never happens. Nobody ever actually does that. But technically, that is permitted in the Income Tax Act. So, but it's good. It's fine. Now, that being said, I think there is something missing here. It's not employment income. It's actually pension income, Shelley. Yeah, rollover is good. Yeah. I wouldn't have, Boston. What I would say is that it would be transferred to another tax deferred plan. Like RSP or RIF, where minimum withdrawals are required starting at age 71, starting no later than age 71. Okay, I think what you have to point out there is that at some point you are drawing that income. Yeah, it is not employment income. Okay, it's tax. Well, I don't know. That's a dangerous thing, Shelley, because I don't know. If I want to get picky around that, for example, I would point out that employment income is useful for figuring out my home office expenses. Okay, whereas other sorts of income are not. So, or I might point out that pension income is eligible for the pension income credit, whereas employment income is not. So I'm not sure if I like same as employment income. I think ordinary income or regular income or something like that is good. Yeah, it is pension income, Melissa. Yeah. Okay. And what do we think about employer contributions here? I think the answer is okay. I'm just going to pick on one choice of wording here. Yeah, rollover is a good word to use there, Alan. Yeah, for sure. This is good. However, I want to be cautious of the word locked in here. Locked in, I know it's not what you're intended to say. You're intended to say not a contractually guaranteed amount or something like that, or not based on earnings or somewhere in that ballpark. But locked in has a very specific meaning, right? Locked in is pension assets that can't be accessed until retirement. And that may or may not be true. The actual locked in feature may or may not be true. So it's good. It's all technically correct. And I find DPSP is one of those areas that people aren't necessarily that comfortable. I would suggest that DPSP is something that goes onto your study list. And the reason for this is because it operates very similar to the RRSP, but it has enough little differences. Yeah, you could mention that, Shelley. That's valid. Yeah. Enough little differences to make it a good exam topic. So it's like I'm testing the RRSP, but not quite. And for that reason, it is a favorite of exam writers. Okay, it's a good place to put in a couple study sessions just to go round out your rules on DPSP, which are honestly pretty straightforward. There's nothing too complicated about it. It just has rules. Yeah, I think that's good, Melissa. Okay, just for the sake of record here, though, I want to make sure that we understand that most DPSPs are actually not true profit sharing plans. Okay, most DPSPs actually work differently from this, and I think it's worth recognizing the reality here. And I would say most employees who are in DPSPs aren't even aware. It just shows up as part of a bigger picture, right? So the DPSP in reality often looks like this. Let's go with a non-DPSP solution for starters, where I'm just using a group RRSP. It is not received tax-free. It is definitely not received. Oh, you're talking about the contribution? Yeah, that's fair, Sharon. I don't know if I like tax-free there. I might like received as a non-taxable benefit, because really it's received tax-deferred. Is that okay? Yeah, I would go with that route. Okay. So if I'm using group RRSP, and this is where this is most obvious, I have an employee who earns $50,000 a year. It's a nice, easy amount to work with. And we have a plan where the employee contributes 5% and the employer matches 1-to-1. Yeah, don't worry too much about the answer sheet, Justin. Honestly, the answer sheets are not going to be perfect in all cases. It's part of why we work through in class. I don't think I like tax-free there. Okay, I think I like non-taxable. It's a fair point, Justin, but I'm really more concerned about your answers than I am about my answers. Good. One of us is right in the exam and one of us is not. Okay. I wish I could, actually. They won't let me. All right. So the employee contribution, here's what's going to happen. This person contributes that $2,500. So we'll just do the math here so we can see it. $50,000 times 5%, that's $2,500. Okay. So that amount is just a tax deduction for the employee. Okay. And then the employer contribution, again, $50,000 times 5%, that's $2,500. When we put that in, that is a taxable benefit for the employee, which the employee will later use as a tax deduction. Now, the employer doesn't really care about that. But what does happen here is that $2,500 is pensionable and insurable for CPP and EI. Okay, so it costs the employer not $2,500. It actually costs the employer $2,500, and then 5.1% for CPP, and add whatever it is today, 1.83, 1.93, I can't remember, percent for EI, somewhere in that vicinity anyways. Okay. So it doesn't cost $2,500, it costs $2,500 plus an extra roughly 7%. And we multiply up to for EI, I should mention, up to your EI maximum earnings, which were below here, and for CPP up to YMP, which were also below. Okay, now what'll happen out of this, the employee, yeah, that's true. If we're looking at, although I don't want to say, because I don't know my WSIB rules, Natalie, and those rules do vary from province to province. But I do agree about LTD. Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay. The net effect for the employee is that they pay tax on 47.5 of net income. Okay. And they get $5,000 towards their retirement. Now, some of that they had to put in themselves, but is everybody with me on our net effect here? Okay. Whereas I can do the same thing using DPSP. And if I do the same thing using DPSP, I still have that same employee contribution of $2,500, just like we did before. That's still tax deductible for the employee, but the employer doesn't use the group RSP now. But rather the DPSP. Okay, so now we're going to have a different outcome here, contribution of $2,500, but it's not a taxable benefit. Okay, it's not a taxable benefit. It does not create a pension adjustment. Right, exactly, Melissa. An individual cannot contribute to a DPSP. Okay, so they're still putting their money into the group RSP. Exactly right. Okay, this amount is not a taxable benefit, and it's not pensionable or insurable. So the employer saves themselves their CPP and EI premiums on that $2,500. And the other thing we can do with the DPSP, now this depends on your province, but the DPSP has more ability to create vesting rules, that is to prevent employee access. Although that rule varies by province, in practice, that's a useful thing. Now, there is a big challenge with DPSP for smaller businesses, and that is that the owners of the business, people who own 10% or more of the shares, cannot participate in DPSP. Okay, but that's really where you see the DPSP used. It's sometimes you do get it in that real profit sharing arrangement, but I find it is far more common today to use it as the match side on the employee's group RSP contribution. Okay, and it would be very normal. You actually see this quite a bit. Most of the banks do this today. A lot of big employers that have big national workforces do this. And that's a great point, Natalie. You cannot do this on the nonprofit side. Absolutely, that little bit of trivia sometimes gets overlooked, and you're sort of midway through presenting this to a big charity that can't do it. Yeah, the employee, so does the employer for that matter, Shelley. It's really a tax deduction. Oh, in red, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, tax deduction for the employee. Same thing, right? You'll get a slip that shows a total of $5,000 of contributions. Okay. All good? You do a lot of group retirement work, Natalie? You seem comfortable enough with the DPSP. All right, I could have guessed, eh? And that's fair then, Natalie, isn't it? When I comment about this for the DPSP and I show it in this use, do you find this in your practice, that it's more often used as the match than it is as the, I don't know, I think the use people think about what they read in the text, which is the sort of profit sharing element. How many employers do you have that actually profit share into it? Yeah, it's the timing is better for employees, isn't it? Okay, because you don't have to wait for that tax deduction come April, you get it all at source. Although the employee gets a smaller CPP benefit as a result. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk about exam day and some of the stuff associated with exam day. I think we have everybody on the call right now, so great time to talk about it. Now, Sarah mentioned something this morning, and I agree with her, that what you should do at some point, sometime around 7 days, maybe a week or two, I should say, a week or two prior to the exam, you want to get a dry run in where you'll use either my exam, my second exam, or the FP Canada practice exam. Okay, and you actually time yourself. Maybe what you do is go to your office, try to duplicate exam conditions. I'll talk about that more in a minute. So write it online, maybe print out your booklet, but write it online, write it on a computer, sorry. Exam conditions, not questions. Time yourself. So you book 3 hours, okay, then lunch, then another 3 hours. And actually run through the exam that way. Okay. That will give you a feel for really where you're kind of mentally at with respect to sitting down and writing that exam. You'll identify where you have pain points, or you'll see how you manage your time. You might pick up on things you do well or do poorly. If you're in a study group, some of you talked about study groups before the coffee break. If you're in a study group, maybe you want to get your study group together and do this. Okay. All right. Then leading up to the exam. So you're going to get, those of you that wrote the level 1 know this, you're going to get about a week before the exam, you'll get your admission ticket from FP Canada. It's 2 3-hour sessions, Malcolm. You actually get 8 hours to write it, all in total, or 9 hours, I can't remember. But it's enough content for one full exam. Okay. Your admission ticket will have your exam location on it. Make sure that you check your name versus your ID here. I find this occasionally goes wrong, where somebody has been recently married or recently unmarried, or where that person has different spellings of their name. Sometimes you see that where your driver's license has one spelling and your passport has another, whatever it is. Make sure that your ID is good. In fact, at this point in class, I always ask people to pull out their driver's license and have a look at their driver's license. That's you. Will your driver's license expire in the time between now and exam day? Will you have valid ID to take in to write the exam? Does your driver's license name match the name that FP Canada thinks you go by? Does everybody have their driver's license in hand right now? Man, I hope so. All right. Middle name is not too big a deal, Justin. First and last is generally what's important. Yeah. There you go, Johnny, right? Okay. But no, it's first and last that they care about. They're not so picky, but they do need valid ID that matches your name. Okay, so you're going to get that admission ticket from FP Canada. That's easy. One of the things that I suggest, and this is especially true for people who have exam stress. And then, in fact, I talked to one of my students the other night. I was at a social function and one of my former students was there. And she said, I did that. I went and checked out the exam location. And on exam day, it actually made a big difference. It's good, Tim, right? Just good that you did it. Okay. And yes, that goes back to my comment earlier, Tim, right? That they're fairly responsive. When you get your transcripts, they are right back on top of it. All that kind of stuff works well with FP Canada. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So here's what I suggest you do. On exam day, you want to have as much mental bandwidth available as possible. You need your decision making to be fully focused on the exam. You want to get as much stuff off your plate in advance as you can. Would everybody agree with that? You want exam day to be as stress-free as possible. Okay, so this sounds like a foolish waste of time, but it pays off. This is actually go check out your exam center. Now, Brian, you're probably not going to drive to Fort St. John, right? Because you're writing in Fort St. John, aren't you, Brian? So take this with a grain of salt, but go check out your exam center in advance, okay? Poke your head in the room if you can do so. And yes, exactly, Cameron. Figure out where will you park? Where will you get lunch that day? Consider you will be there on a weekday. If you're writing at a post-secondary institution, which quite a few of you will be, what's the parking going to be like at that post-secondary institution on a Friday versus if you go check it out on the weekend? Maybe you think about taking an Uber or a taxi or whatever that day instead of worrying about where to park. Okay. Doing all of these things in advance just reduces, Melissa, well, to be fair, Melissa, happy hour at our university bar started at noon on Fridays. So, all right. The plant, right? Edmonton folks, the power plant. Anybody with me here? Okay. So get this stress off your plate, okay? All right, then you have to be realistic about your exam schedule or your study schedule in that week prior. It's a fair question, Margaret. That's an unusual scenario. I've never heard that before. I like that. I don't know. It depends how distracted home is. If you got like 5 kids running around, maybe better not to go home for lunch. But if you can kick all the kids out, yeah, I think that's probably good, honestly. Okay. I would go home, but I work from home normally. I'm home right now, in fact, and I do not find working from home distracting. I find this is where I get the most work done. Isn't Nanaimo on the list, Coralie? I thought Nanaimo was on the list too. I can't speak to Victoria. I just haven't dealt with enough exam writers on the island, Coralie. Okay, yeah, for some reason I thought there was one in Nanaimo as well. But yeah, that's probably a fair bet. I just don't know if it'll be the exact same place. I can't imagine there's too many places in Victoria. There might be a half dozen computer labs that are left for rent in a place like that. Okay, which is really what it comes down to, right? You need a functional computer lab. All right, now this is where this group has a real strength, is in this realism. So you're so far from the exam right now. You're still 6 weeks from exam day. You have lots of time to study. And last time we're together, I asked you to do this, to open up Outlook. If you haven't done this, now do it. You open up Outlook or whatever you use for your calendar schedule and set a 30-minute block of study time. Might be 60 minutes, whatever you can do, but of study time every day between now and the exam. And what that will do, it saves that stress, that urgency, that panic in the week before the exam. Because what I find happens otherwise here is this plan to cram, where you say, I'm going to book 3 days off or some version of that and do all my studying there. This doesn't work for a number of reasons. First off, it's just too much content. The breadth of content here is too great to expect that cram approach to work. Okay, it's just not viable. The next problem with this is this doesn't work out. This is almost always what I find happens when somebody does this kind of thing. You book 3 days. So day 1, yeah, okay, you sit down to study, but there ends up being a honey-do list. You've been neglecting that because you've been studying anyways, and you don't get that done. And then day 2, maybe you get a half day of study and you do something with the kids. And then day 3, well, now you haven't been at work for 2 days. And so you catch up on emails and calls. And that is exactly what I find happens with this plan to cram. It just does not work out. And the problem then is when you sit down to write, you're in exactly the opposite position of what you want to be in. You have stress now because you didn't study enough. When I say be realistic, that's what I mean. You use your calendar to manage your time. You use the same time management you use with client appointments or with your normal workflow, whatever that looks like. Any questions there? Okay. Now, my other comment is in this week leading up to the exam, and I should add a fourth point to this. In this week leading up to the exam, you're going to want to study a bunch. Yeah, and Cameron, that's going to be, now, I don't know what sort of team environment you're in, but I think that's pretty normal for most people. And that's where you're going to put your study time in now, right? You take control of this. You start studying tomorrow, that half hour a day, because, and might be my 3-day schedule isn't quite right here, but I think that your experience is kind of reflective of what I'm trying to illustrate with that last 3 days, with that plan to cram. Okay. In the week prior to the exam, you're going to feel like this trade-off is needed, where do I study or do I take care of myself? And the challenge here, we've heard it a few times, whether it's RTFQ or whether it's missing important details or whether it's rushing through questions, how your brain is working on exam day is way more important than exactly what you're carrying around in your head. So you need optimal performance on exam day. And that doesn't come from a whole bunch of study right at the tail end here. That comes from regular discipline study leading up to the exam. But on exam day, that means you want to be well rested. You want to be physiologically sound. You don't want to have eaten funny or whatever the case is. You want to have eaten well. You want to have exercised, and you want your emotional state good. You want to have taken care of your relationships. If you sit down to write and those things aren't all in play, then don't do it. Well, Malcolm, if you're a gym rat, if you're in the gym every morning at 5 and you're counting your reps on the bench press, then yeah, do that on exam day. That's good. But the day before the exam is not the day to shoot for your personal best for the first time in a decade. That's good. If your normal exercise is taking the dog for a walk, then that's your normal exercise. That's what you do. Don't mix up the routine here. That's good. Just like the night before the exam might not be the best night for that adventure in dining you've been waiting to try in your local neighborhood. Okay. Are we good there? Is everybody with me that your physiological and emotional state is more important than study in that time leading up to the exam? Okay. But you have to have studied to get there. It's a hard thing to do. I find it is very common that I get a bunch of emails the night of the exam where I can see that people have that frantic last minute bit of study happening. That is a self-destructive tendency. There's nothing good that comes out of that last bit of frantic study the night before the exam. I'm not even available that night. If you send me emails, I'm actually on a plane to Winnipeg that night. I won't even answer. Okay. I'm there for you, but I'm also trying to help you make good decisions about how you allocate your study time. All right, the day prior to the exam. Again, here's what I would suggest. Day prior to the exam, as much as possible, make this just a regular work day. Now, don't book an appointment with your most frustrating client. Or managers, as the case may be. Okay. Avoid those. Okay. But as much as possible, just have that as a regular work day. You go to work, you keep your mind off the exam, and then that night, you sit down with the family or whatever you find relaxing, hang out with your friends or whatever, have a glass of wine, relax, okay? Just the glass, stop there, and get yourself a decent night of sleep. That's good. At that point, you have done everything you can possibly do to prepare. You have to come to terms with it. Okay. Day of the exam. Let's pop over to FP Canada's website. And we'll look at what we can bring into the exam with us. Okay, as mentioned, you have to bring your admission ticket. That is a must. And they say up to 2 weeks before. It's usually about 7 to 10 days before. Excuse me, sorry about that you'll get it. Okay. And you're just bringing your clean, unmolested admission ticket. Yeah. So you will get it in your FP Canada portal, Malcolm, and you'll print it off from your FP Canada portal. Okay. ID, I talked about this already. Hopefully it's not a problem now. Your calculator, and we already looked at the list of approved calculators. Anybody have a concern about their calculator? I think, Malcolm, you said you have to go buy one. Oh, did you? Okay, so this is a valid point Chris raises. Here's what I would suggest you do. Now, it depends what calculator you have, but you're only allowed one calculator in the exam with you. So you may find, though, that some places allow you to bring both in, Malcolm, but most places, the instructions actually say only one calculator. Okay, so we'll see. It depends how picky your proctor is, but that is something to look at anyways. Now, if you're using the Texas Instruments, most versions of the Texas Instruments, change your batteries before the exam because you need an instrument screwdriver. Still bring a spare and an instrument screwdriver. You can get all this stuff at the dollar store for like $4. It's not an expensive thing. And then if you're using the HP or most versions of the Sharp, you don't need a calculator. I do have a version of the Sharp that needs a screwdriver, but whichever. If you're using an HP, just bring a spare battery with you. This actually happened on the day that I wrote my exam. This is way back. It was a different exam then, but on the day that I wrote my exam, the guy next to me, with about 15 minutes before the lunch break, I could see he was hammering on his calculator and it had stopped working on him. He did not have a spare battery with him. Thankfully, when we wrote, there was a Future Shop across the street, and he was able to run across to Future Shop at the break and buy a new battery. Okay. Weird, eh? So yes, spare battery is a great piece of advice, Chris. Absolutely. Kind of like that, Tim. I can't remember if I wrote my exam pre or post Blockbuster, but it was pretty close. Okay. It depends on the calculator, Melissa. In the HP, I used to use HP calculators, and I would find I would have to change my batteries about once every 5 or 6 months. Now, I promise I use my calculator more than you do. BA2 Plus, I lost my calculator before the batteries ran out, Melissa. Okay. Years and years anyways, but I still think it's worth changing them. Okay, it's just a risk you don't want to take. And still have a spare set of batteries, right? You might even carry your old batteries in with you. They do actually say, if you look at the instructions here, they say you can bring spare batteries, but somewhere here it says that they have to be in their original packaging. There it is right there. Yeah, just the batteries, Sharon. Don't buy a new calculator. Just change the batteries. Okay. It really is an easy trip to the dollar store to get batteries and the screwdriver you need to change it. Okay, that's all good. They have to be in the packaging. Oh, sorry, loose batteries without packaging. There it is. Sorry, I apologize. Okay, loose batteries. Okay, yeah, there it is. No, I don't think you can bring the packaging in with you. Honestly, what I did on exam day, I just had a Ziploc baggie and I put everything I needed in my Ziploc baggie and carried my admission ticket. Okay, I really packed light. Now, I have the benefit here. Yeah, whatever it is, Cameron, right? Yeah, like I knew I wasn't dealing with any biological concerns at the time, Sharon, right? I'm hardly ever on my period, so I don't have that kind of thing to deal with. All right, good. But pack as light as you can. That'd be my advice. Okay, then what will you have with you in the exam? So we talked about admission ticket, your ID, your calculator, pencils and eraser. You do need to bring your own pencils and eraser. Bring your own writing utensils. Somebody asked me about a highlighter. Yeah, they don't specify an HB or a number 2 pencil, Joan, so mechanical pencil should be fine. I find most exam centers are not too picky about this. Maybe you look at a highlighter. Maybe you'll look at pens, whatever, but definitely bring at least one pencil. Okay, earplugs. Well, that's the question of whether pens are allowed or not at all, Tim, right? If pens are allowed, then different colored pens are fine. Yeah, everything you're going to do in the exam center will be typed, Justin. Yeah. Okay. Earplugs. I think this is actually not a bad idea, especially if you're easily distracted. Unfortunately, I run into this fairly often where somebody comes out of the exam and says, my proctor was on the phone for the first half hour. A lot of times it's that they're trying to deal with a technical limitation that they have a student who's having a hard time logging in or something like that. And that's where it's really nice to have a set of earplugs with you. Okay, that's good. Now it can't be like big ear to, oh no, Sharon, that's hard. Okay, but that's a good learning experience, and you're here, so you passed it, right? So that's a good learning experience, just about how distracting this can be. Yeah, my exam, there was 2 proctors in the room, and they were talking to each other the whole time. And it was that challenge of, do I put up my hand and say, hey, would you shut up? And then you have that little bit of like confrontation, that raised blood pressure thing, or do you just grin and bear it? It's a hard thing to strike a balance around. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to bring earplugs. And I always think about this. There's a lady who comes to some of my classes sometimes. Yeah, I've seen that one too, Cameron. And she types with the ends of her fingernails. And I always think about having that thing happening beside me when I'm writing. So I think it's a good idea to bring earplugs. I wouldn't normally wear them, but better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them. Okay, water bottle. This is generally the only thing you'll be permitted to bring as far as food or beverage. This is entirely dependent on the test center. It is a computer lab, and some computer labs say no water. If you are bringing it with you, it has to be in a clear bottle and no label on it or anything like that. You go to Superstore or Loblaws, whatever, and you buy yourself a bottle of water and tear the label off. Good? And I don't care if it's actually water in the bottle, whatever, no judgment, but clear water bottle, no label. All right, that's good. And I talked about this last time. If you happen to need, yeah, and some exam centers won't care about that, Cameron, but some exam centers would genuinely stop that person and say, hey, water bottle only, and would not allow that in. So whatever, you take your chances. If you bring something to the exam, like a highlighter, and the exam proctor says no highlighters allowed, it's not on the list, fine. You just put the highlighter in your bag and leave it. Don't fight with that person. There's no good that comes of that. Just accept that you're writing without a highlighter. Okay, if these things are needed, you're technically too late now, but still reach out to FP Canada and let them know. They may need to see a doctor's note. And you can absolutely use the washroom during the exam. You just put up your hand and the proctor will come, you'll flip over your scrap paper or your booklet, and they will send you out to the washroom. Perfectly fine to do that. I actually think it's not a bad idea to get up once and stretch your legs in the middle of a 3-hour session anyways. It just gets everything working better. Yeah, that's a good point, Malcolm. I think it depends where you are. I find usually they're pretty well organized. I mean, whatever gets you through the exam, Nelson. Okay. All right, that might be distracting for others in the room. The stuff you can't bring. So what they'll normally do, if you bring a backpack or purse or whatever with you, there will normally be a table somewhere in the room, and you just put that backpack or purse on that table. Obviously, you can't bring any study materials in. Your phone. I have a crazy suggestion, something that I'm sure is going to be completely foreign. How about you just leave your phone alone for the day? Leave it in your car. Yeah, you can access that stuff during the lunch break. That's fine. Leave it in the car or at home. Okay, something like that. I know it's crazy, Chris. It won't know what to do if you don't turn it on for 6 hours, okay? But the nice thing about this is this will minimize your distractions. Well, I mean, there is that, Justin, right? This will minimize your distractions. And this has happened for some of my students. I have had students go through a range of experiences on exam day. You have a child at home, child gets sick, you're in writing the exam. Look, if it's a dire emergency, somebody will come and get you. But if it's the normal thing, child is sick, they have to go to the hospital, they're going to be in a waiting room for a couple hours, a doctor will see them and prescribe antibiotics. You don't need to be there for that. It's okay to let whoever else is responsible for childcare handle that. There was a time when we went through our lives without that instant access to mom and dad all the time. Good? Nothing good will come out of you answering your phone on the lunch hour or returning calls on the lunch hour. There is nothing that's going to happen there that's going to increase your chances to pass this exam. Okay. Am I asking too much here? I know I probably am, but that is my genuine advice. That's something that's going to make your day go better. Okay, and yeah, you're not allowed to bring jacket or coat. So when I wrote my exam, I wrote in November, just like you're writing, and I parked at the parkade adjacent to the exam center, left my jacket in there, really packed very light, just meant that I wasn't likely to forget anything in the exam center. Everything was really simple. Now, if you do bring your phone in with you and you put it in your purse or your backpack, turn it off first. Don't leave your phone on in your purse or backpack. I know it doesn't hurt you, but it's intrusive for everybody else who's writing when it rings like that. And that is an inevitability. Some of you on the call will have that experience where somebody in the exam center will leave their phone on. Okay, that's all good. Yeah, that's a nice thing, Melissa. If you get lockers, some exam centers have that luxury. Most places, though, it's a table at the front of the room. You'll get scrap paper from your proctor. And I occasionally find exam centers provide earplugs as well, but don't count on that. If you need earplugs, you should go and get a set of earplugs. All right, questions there? No, Jamie, it does not. The 90-day study schedule is not designed to cover off sort of a set list of content. What it's designed to do is to get you into that habit of daily study, to give you something to look at every single day. I didn't just pick it randomly. It's not just 90 random items, but it's not necessarily going to treat that END list as a checklist. Definitely no to a headset, Cameron. Yeah, that is a definite no. Just earplugs. Okay. Now, if you had a medical need for a headset, I don't know what that looks like, but if that was something you had a medical need for, great. You have to identify that to FP Canada in advance. Okay. Then your time management. I know we've talked about this a lot, about time management, and there's a reason that I talk about this a lot. It is a must. And what you have to do here, as far as your time management goes, when you sit down to write, have a plan. And as you see for my bottom point on the day of, write down that plan. And that plan might include your time management strategy. That might include your tips for answering questions. That might include some of those little worksheets for your financial calculator. Take that first 3 or 4 minutes and just write everything down. Okay? If you don't write your plan down, you have no plan. This is where I'll use the Mike Tyson quote. But you know the Mike Tyson quote I'm thinking of here? I hear this all the time now, all over the place. This is everybody. That's the one. Troy knows. Okay. Because this is going to happen on the exam. Now, nobody's literally going to punch you in the face. Okay. But the first time you have a question on the exam that is a little bit outside of what you're expecting or has content in it that's unfamiliar, your stress level will go up, your brain will stop responding properly. It is sort of the mental equivalent of that punch in the face. And you need to reset then and be able to come back to that plan. And if you don't have that plan written down in front of you, then you're not going to get the reset you need. There is nothing more important that you can do on exam day than to take that 3 or 4 minutes and write down the plan. Now, you can't do this before the timer starts. This will take 3 or 4 minutes out of your exam time. Okay? Your proctor will say, you can start writing now. You take your piece of scrap paper, you write down your plan. You'll have to throw that out at lunch, and then after lunch, you'll do it again. This will chew up some of your valuable time, but it's a good use of that time. So remember yesterday, Matt, when we did the financial calculator, I drew a line and I wrote out PY, CY times PY, IY, PV, payment, FV, beginner end. Just that. I'll show you an example of it in chapter 5, if you like, when we're done this. Okay. Okay. Is there any reason you would not take a couple of minutes to sit down and write out your plan on exam day? Because it feels like a waste of time? Because it seems like a foolish thing to do? That is the thing that students report back to me when they say, I had a good experience on exam day. It is generally, they connect it back to having started off with this sort of foundation for success. Now, as far as actually managing your time in the exam, recall what I said about this, that you're going to take about the first 2 hours for your case studies. That will be somewhere between 20 to 24 minutes per case. You don't run the egg timer here. You can't keep it that tight, but you should be done your third case at about the 1 hour, maybe 1 hour and 10-minute mark, depending how long the cases are. If you're not, you have to step it up a bit. And then, as I said earlier, half that time for reading and half for answering. And then about an hour for multiple choice. We'll talk about multiple choice this afternoon. Okay, that's all good. And then you'll stop at the 3-hour mark and you'll start over with a new exam in the afternoon. And I have seen this where a student says, I thought after the morning session I was in trouble, and then I had the afternoon session, it went so much better. Or I've seen the other version of that. It's just that there's so few questions on the exam that you're going to have things you're comfortable with and things you're not. Some of them will show up in the morning, some of them will show up in the afternoon. You can't let 1 or 2 bad questions throw you off. You still have to work through the exam as if you have a reasonable shot at it. Okay, then minimize distractions. And I already talked about leaving the cell phone at home. This is a very normal thing on exam day. I find you're going to be writing with a bunch of other financial advisors. Some of you might know. You'll show up at exam day. There will be 3 or 4 people there that you know. Everybody kind of sits around waiting for the exam to start and talks about how they studied, or talks about the exam, or talks about their exam prep, or talks about something related to the exam. This is the one day in your life when I need a bunch of people who are very used to being very social to be antisocial. Okay. Avoid discussing the exam or study or anything related. Again, there's nothing good that comes of this. All that ends up happening out of this is there'll be one person in the group who was super organized with their studies. They did flashcards, and they had a schedule, and they knew exactly the content they were going to study. And they'll end up kind of, I don't know, whatever, humble bragging about that, while the other people at the table sit around feeling increasingly inadequate. That does not help. There's no good to that. If you can keep the discussion to sports, great. We should be talking about the whatever 15-2 Oilers by then. Okay. See, Melissa? Now you're thinking. All right. Talk about sports, talk about the weather, but not the exam. If you can't do that, that's when you're going to be there. See, Chris, you're with me here. Yeah, perfect. Talk about something less stressful like politics, Malcolm. Easy. We should be talking about a second election by then. All right. The yeah, sports, pets, weather, something else. If you can't do anything else, then be antisocial and go for a walk. Put on your best Unabomber hoodie. And duck out. Okay. That's all good? Yeah, perfect. Phone in the glove box, Cameron. Easy stuff. All right. Is there anybody who's not sure what to expect on exam day? Yeah, I agree with that, Jamie. To the greatest extent possible, leave nothing blank. That's on my checklist. What are you going to review, though, Cameron? I don't think there's any good to that. I think you have to clear your head at lunch. Yeah, I think you have to clear your head. I think you have to go for a walk, stretch it out, have a few laughs, whatever, but not to continue trying to have that focused activity over lunch. There's no good to that. Yeah, it's going to be a long day. 6 hours of exam writing is already a brutally long experience. Add another hour of study at lunch. You're going to shut your brain down. See, that's it, Nelson. That's exactly what you don't need to hear, isn't it? There's nothing good about that conversation. Yeah. Okay. And it's hard to avoid, isn't it? We're so social, right? You just get into these conversations, you end up talking to people, not realizing where the conversation is going to take you. And you can't very well at the end of it say, I don't want to talk to you guys. Bunch of failures. I'm out of here. Right? Okay. Now, following the exam, okay, and by the way, that is not how I feel. I've had plenty of good students, people that I like and respect, who have gotten to that third and fourth attempt. Well, not plenty on the fourth. I've had a couple get to the fourth attempt. I've had a few get to the third. That's difficult. It's a real challenge when you get that far into it. All right, following the exam. You're going to get, and it's usually about a week. So if you have a bad experience in the exam, you have about a week to identify it to FP Canada. Okay, that's about as long as they give you. If you do that, if you have some bad experience, it takes a long time to log in, or your proctor is disruptive, or whatever, then they can make accommodations. They will not make accommodations for scoring. They just don't. They're not going to give you bonus marks because of a disruptive environment or anything like that, no matter what kind of persuasive argument you can make. Instead, your best case scenario here is they give maybe a free rewrite, and they only do that in extreme circumstances. I've probably seen this, I think maybe 3 or 4 times. And I've probably put, I don't even know where we're at now, I should be tracking at about 1,200 students through to this exam. So this is not a typical event. And free might be financially free, or it might be that it doesn't count against your rights, or it might be both. But you should do that. If you have that bad experience, you should sit down after the exam and send FP Canada an email. Don't let that go and figure, well, I'll let them know later. They really can only do anything with it in that first week or so, because they have to then make adjustments to what they do in the grading process. And once that ship has left the harbor, it's very hard to change course. Okay, I've said this a few times already. Despite the fact that this does happen, I try to avoid it, but do not discuss questions on the exam. This is actually contrary to your standards of professional responsibility. Okay, so we want to leave that one alone. Don't discuss questions on the exam. Just better off not to do that. That being said, one of the things that I think is worth doing is maybe the day after the exam, or even after you come out of the exam, take about 10 to 30 minutes and write down what you didn't know. Just take a few minutes to jot that down. Think about that. Keep that as a record. If you do fail, you'll feel better about your ability to study the second time around. It gives you a good starting point. I find otherwise people don't think about it until 2 or 3 months afterwards. Okay. And following the exam, we do normally send an email to all of our exam prep students. And all I'm going to ask you here is once results are out, which is going to be about 2 months after you write, we will send you an email and I'll ask 2 questions. How did your time go? I always want to know about how people allocated that time. And the other question, did you pass? Although it does get reported in the press release later on, that press release doesn't come out until months and months after the exam, and that's important for our stats. And we do put people's names in a draw, whether they pass or fail. Anybody who reports back, we give away some free financial planning textbooks, or I guess books, not textbooks. Okay, are there any questions about leading up to the exam or anything associated with that? About 2 months, Malcolm. It's going to be about 2 months after you write. It's a long time. And it's just because of the very large number of exam writers this time around. It normally is only about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, but they are at capacity for the number of exam writers and just how it goes. I will mention, just in case, I know it can help to put us at ease a little bit. If you do fail the exam, you can rewrite in June of 2020. You're set for that, unless it's your 4th attempt. Okay, and in that case, you'd have to redo a bunch, or you have to do the PEP. You will have to take the ethics course, just a small little ethics course. Some of the folks on the call have taken it already, I think. It's about a 3 or 4 hour course. Okay, and you might want to, there is some new material that will be added for June of 2020. You'll need more stuff on the human behavior side and more stuff on the credit side. Those will be the 2 things that get added to the exam fairly substantially from where they are right now. But it's all manageable. Really, failing this exam is not the worst thing that can happen. I know that we look at this as having all these consequences, but I would suggest that in some ways, one meeting with a client can have more material outcomes than sitting and writing this exam. It's just the exam is an unfamiliar experience. Yeah, that's such a nightmare, Cameron. I did talk about that a little bit on day 1. There was hardly anything. If you go back and watch the day 1 recording, there was hardly anything out of that budget that I identified as being material. The RRSP changes and the GIS changes were the big ones. The shared equity program was maybe the 3rd, the CMHC shared equity program. I think other than that, you have nothing really to worry about from 2019's budget. Okay, those are the 3 personal finance items that got approval that you're going to see show up. Thanks, Margaret. Look at that. Okay. And honestly, I hardly ever find that that's actually a problem. I know they say anything that's received royal assent as of whatever date, October 1st or November 1st, I can't remember. But I don't think I've ever had a student come away from that exam and say, I wish that I had studied more of the very most recent changes in taxation. Okay. Home buyer's plan would be the one that I would be most concerned with there, just because I think it would be fairly likely that there was already a home buyer's plan question written and that home buyer's plan question might have had a little change made to it because of the move from $25,000 to $35,000. Okay, but Margaret's notes there look pretty good, just based on a quick scan. Okay, perfect. How'd you find that so quickly, Margaret? You must be some sort of hyper organized, eh? Look at that. Okay. I've taught this class like 50 times now, Margaret, and there's no way I could have found my notes that quickly. All right, let's do a little bit more question before we break for lunch here. So we left off having looked at Helen, and we finished that case study out. That should take us to Jerry and Susan. Now, I made a change to the Jerry and Susan case just the other day. I actually think I don't want to do this one. I'm just going to point out the change that I made. I had a problem with this question, and I did fix it. If anybody wants to do it, I can do this, but I think I'd rather skip to item 9 and go there. But I'll show you what I did change. I changed the question for question 19, where all the answers were based on taking commuted value, but the question had said the choice of survivor's benefit. So that's maybe a little bit cleaner this way. Okay, so I'll remind you the questions here, and let me know if anybody wants to volunteer for any of them. I'm happy to do them. Otherwise, we're going to push on to the next question. Okay, how about this actually? I know it's important to folks to do this one. Can we do Karen and Gord right now? Does anybody have a Karen and Gord they want to share? That's the exam 2 item. That's the one out of exam 2 that I had said we would do today. Do I have a volunteer for that one? That's our veterinarian selling her clinic. There's got to be somebody out there good for that one. Is that true? Nobody? Nobody's got a Karen and Gord for me? Even a stab at it? Okay, well, I'll bring it up here and we'll go through it this way. Okay, well, let's see what we can figure out here together. Okay, I've got my Karen and Gord case study. And just as I pointed out yesterday, I would work through this thing, have a lot of notes here. This is one where there's a lot of detail in the case study. I really wrote this case study this way deliberately. I had a few people come back from a couple versions of the exam and say, you know, I ran into a couple of case studies that were more complicated than the case studies you had on your exam. So I thought, well, you want a complicated case study? I can do a complicated case study. So we have a we've got Karen and Gord. Okay, and we know they are married to each other, mid-40s. Karen is a veterinarian. And unincorporated. Okay, that's all good. And I see that Gord cannot be a shareholder. Anybody on the call do a lot of work with professional corporations, dentists or physicians or anything like that? Architects or engineers? If you really are working in that professional corporation world, yeah, and maybe then, Chris, you don't get too involved in it, but those rules will be different. So dentists, I think in most provinces, dentists are actually okay with holdcos, but you may find some provinces don't allow dentists to have a holdco, or some provinces may not allow dentists to have a spouse as a shareholder. I think though dentists are generally actually not subject to too much in the way of restrictions that way. Okay, so right. I know that's a big one, Margaret, right? And they can't even incorporate, right? Isn't that right, Margaret? Vets can't incorporate. It depends on the province, Sharon. In Alberta, for example, Doc can incorporate. They can have their spouse as a shareholder, but their spouse can't have any voting rights. Okay, so it depends on the province. Everything is a little different. Well, I want to make sure that's relevant, Melissa. That's something that, in this case, we're not operating a business anymore. She's selling the business, right? So I'm not so concerned about that here. It's not my campground problem from this morning, right? Right. So that's something I would think about here, and that's what I'm going to look at. So I see the assets right here. We have equipment with a fair market value at 45,000 and UCC at 22,000. And we have the client list, and it has a fair market value of 320,000. Okay, it's really those two assets. All right, I don't want to overthink this. I don't know what the question is going to be. So I've identified those two things. That's really all that I need to maybe worry about here. I might point to annual revenues of 170,000. Okay, oh, revenues. And no other business. She built it from scratch. When I see that, I know that her client list has an ACB of nil, or at least I can probably make that assumption. I can see she never purchased any other assets, and that would definitely make that client list have an ACB of nil. The only way there'd be an ACB for that client list is if she bought it from somebody else. And there's a strong indication here that she did not. Okay, she's leasing space. I know there's no real estate. And to your question, Melissa, then that's relevant, right? We have no concerns about real estate here. I don't care about my campground example or anything associated with that. Well, it does say the veterinary equipment is selling for $45,000. And the sale price for the client list at $320,000. Okay. Okay. Why do I care that she's never previously sold a business? What does that matter for? Yeah, she's never used any capital gains exemption. Okay, it's true, but remember, I like how Brian and Cameron both came. Remember, the rule is that as long as I own the underlying assets or my spouse has for the prior 24 months, I can incorporate and use the lifetime capital gains exemption right then and there. So even if you were never incorporated, when that sale happens, you can then incorporate and use lifetime capital gains exemption as long as it's the property that's been used in the business for that prior 24 months. Okay, we get a little description of Gord here, not much. A little description of the kids, and then we have a long list of assets and some tax rates as well. I should probably be a little worried when I see this list of tax rates. Okay, and we got Alicia in school, and that's costing $10,000 a year, and that's coming out of the RESP. Okay, that's good. You have to incorporate first, Justin, but you could do exactly this thing. In fact, we're going to see this with Karen. She's sole proprietor right now. She gets an offer to buy. She can go see her lawyer and accountant, incorporate, and sell the next day as a share sale and use her lifetime capital gains exemption. Okay. That's good. Again, as long as she's owned the underlying assets for at least that 24 months prior. All right. And this little description, what are they looking at? What's important to them? Are they going to be able to sustain themselves? Perfect. Okay, this is the question I think that gets people. I think this is the one where, I don't know, people may have destroyed property when they saw this question or developed aneurysms or whatever, but there is some stuff we can do here. Now, first off, what kind of question is this? Yeah, see, I had to use the word tax base because that's the sort of broad term for ACB, right? Adjusted cost base, or UCC. Okay. Yeah, I think it's probably collection. It's a little bit analysis-y just because you're comparing two different scenarios. Okay, and regardless, maybe you're frustrated by that word tax base in there, but the rest of the template should actually help me to identify that. So first we're going to do the sale of veterinary equipment. Now just bear with me for a second here. Can I do this in a way that's actually useful for myself? There, yeah, good. Okay. So sale of veterinary equipment, proceeds would be how much? This is if she sells without incorporating. Proceeds there is 45,000. Okay, even if I didn't know what tax base meant, I can see taxable income. How do I arrive at the taxable income for a depreciable asset? That's it, right? It's just fair market value minus UCC. Okay, so maybe I don't even know what tax base is, but I'll put it in just so we can see it. But if I know my calculation to arrive at taxable income, I should actually be okay here. Okay, the client list. My proceeds here would be how much? $320. What's the tax base this time? And again, looking at the template, okay, tax base is nil. What's my taxable income on this disposition? That's right, it's a nil ACB, Melissa, right on. What has to happen to figure out my taxable income? What kind of income is this going to be? It's a capital gain. When I see a ACB, I know it's a capital gain, and therefore a 50% inclusion rate. Okay, and it gives me taxable income then of 160,000. Yep, that's right, Brian. Yep. Okay, assuming you're not incorporated, and I could have done exactly this scenario, Brian, for a financial advisor, right? I could have used, instead of using a Karen, a veterinarian, I could have used a financial advisor who built their business from scratch and had exactly the same thing. Okay, that's good. All right, total taxable income then. Now it's pretty easy, right? 183,000. And I'll just remind you what I said earlier. This is exactly a place where I might do this. So let's say I don't know what tax base means. Well, how about this? Put 0 in there. And what's that going to cost me? In terms of my result now, what's that going to cost me? That's what I'll lose, Jamie, right? It was a half a mark, but I can get the rest of my marks. Okay. And don't worry, your grader is not going to think you're stupid and give you marks off for other things or whatever. It's not how it works. Okay. It's just one item out of what is really a fairly hefty amount of marks. And now we'd have to calculate the tax payable. I don't want to actually do this calculation. No, unfortunately, there is not, Sharon. Okay, you just have to calculate it. What I was going to say. All right, but you're going to do it. Whatever, it's just work. And net proceeds. No, I would not, Malcolm. And the reason I know not to is because I don't see that as an item on here. Okay. If I had, Malcolm, some indication that there was going to be some veterinary income this year, there would actually have to be a box for that. They're not going to expect you to drag in information where it's not obvious in your template. Okay. And yes, these are combined federal and provincial rates. The question does say, Brian, the rates in the province they are in. Okay. And I mean, I know that 50% tax rate, that's not just a provincial tax rate, right? Okay, so whatever the net proceeds are, it's something like 130,000 or whatever. I don't really care. Oh, sorry, 130,000 of tax. I apologize. Is that all it is? Oh, yeah, sorry. I did it on the larger amount, 59.7. Thank you. Okay, and that leaves us with net proceeds then of, yeah, wrote 305,000. Okay, that's all good. That's the more difficult one. I know that's the question that causes people grief. I don't even have to know. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's quite true, Melissa. Depreciation is not unique to an incorporated entity. It's something you can have. You might be taking this. Some of you own a passenger vehicle and are not incorporated. Oh, Connor, you're going to kick yourself. Just look back up in the case study. Okay. You're going to make the same comment you made earlier. All right. But the case study lists all the tax rates. Yeah, there's really, Melissa, nice. Very little distinction for the most part between actually running a business in a corporation versus running a business individually. Okay. The same things are still income, the same things are still expenses. Yes, your tax rates change. And yes, if you're incorporated, you have to pay yourself dividends to get money out. But otherwise, most of the Income Tax Act deals with running a business versus specifically incorporation or sole proprietorship. Okay, so don't let that drag you down. Yeah, that's right. That's what I said. When you're selling, that's one of the times when it becomes material. Right. That was the question that came up earlier, Chris. I'm not using any other income because there's no box for it. Okay. You're safer to show your calculations. You don't have to, Connor. Perfectly up to you how you do it. But if you show your calculations, you're giving your grader more to work with. That would allow your grader to see, oh, this is where Connor made a mistake. And now your grader is going to have an easier time finding you marks later on. Yeah, in fact, I don't know what the question was on the last exam, but I know on the last exam, I had some students come back to me and complain that they spent a lot of time just transcribing something like that. I don't know if it was a tax calculation exactly, but I had a lot of students come back and say there was this exercise that really just took a lot of time typing numbers into the template. Okay, now I don't have to worry about knowing my lifetime capital gains exemption rules or anything like that. I can fight the question, but if I just look at the question literally tells me everything I need to know other than actually doing the math for me. It says if she incorporates and sells the shares, then what would happen? It's right there. I don't have to know anything except that I have to total something up and do some math now. Okay, I would take 320,000 Yeah, then it's a whole different beast, Brian. Then it's a depreciable asset, and you would have depreciation on it, and it would look more like the sale of our building from yesterday. Yeah, it's a depreciable asset, and it depreciates, right? So Brian, let's say you went and bought a block of business today. You with me here? And you've got 100 clients in that block of business. Well, a year from now, how many of those clients would it be realistic that you have done some business with, or that you're still doing business with? You would assume that some of those clients would use that excuse to go start dealing with their cousin or whatever who's now in the business, wouldn't you? But I have that right? That really is a depreciating asset, or some of them might move away. Great, see? Some of them might move away, or some of them might die. Whatever it is, they're not all going to be your clients a year from now. That is a depreciating asset. Sure, some of them will. That's the assumption you make when you buy that. But with an asset like that, there will be some loss of value over time. Yeah, there might be increase of value to offset that, but some of those folks are going to move away. So the 305 just came from, we had 320 plus 45,000 minus 59.7. I know the math doesn't work out perfectly here, but roughly 305. Okay. I don't want to do the actual math, Melissa, but that'll be pretty close. We're within a few $100 there, right? Okay. Now back to sell the shares at a 20% discount, 320 plus 45,000. That's 365. 365. And you could do times 0.8, or you could do minus 20%, whichever, doesn't matter. And you will get to that discounted price. That's 292,000. Okay, the tax base. This is the most difficult part of this whole thing. The tax base here would actually be 22,000, which is the same tax base for the depreciable equipment. Because when she used Section 85 to roll her depreciable assets into her new corporation, she carries that tax base over. Now, maybe you don't know that. If you don't know that, what do? Just put 0, Boston, right? Or tear up your exam booklet and run screening from the exam room, one or the other. Probably easier just to put 0, though. Taxable income then would be $270,000. Okay. I didn't decide on it. There was no decision to make. It's the same. I brought it over from the depreciable equipment. Okay, the depreciable equipment had that tax base. When you move that into, the solution should show 22,000. Okay. I'll fix my broken solutions, but not today. All right. Okay. And what did you pick on me for before? Tax-free on Helen. Okay. No, it's good. Yeah, then you would add those two amounts up. So you're quite right, Melissa. If she had a tax base on that sale of client list, then you would add that amount in as well. Yeah, that's what you're allowed to do under Section 85. You carry your tax base over to your new shares, your new property. Okay. Yeah, that should be 22,000. That's disappointing. Okay, anyways, then you would do the same tax calculation. Oh, sorry. Sorry, taxable income would be 270 still. Yeah, you're right. I could do times 50%. That's a valid point. And I would get to 135. Sorry, what's the tax payable here? What's 183? Because it's two different scenarios, Justin. In one case, we're selling the equipment directly. In the other case, we've incorporated and we're selling the shares. Okay, it is two different things. Yeah, okay, I got you. And yeah, that's it, Melissa. Tax payable is 0 because we would use the lifetime capital gains exemption. And net proceeds here would be the full 292,000. Okay. That's good. This would definitely be a question in that WTF range. If you can scrape together a few marks out of a question like this, beautiful. If you can't, that's the whole idea, Malcolm. She is incorporating, right? Or at least she's considering whether it's worth it to incorporate. Okay. Other way, actually, Brian, other way, right? She has 305,000 of net proceeds if she sells personally, and 292 if she sells after incorporating. Yeah. Okay. So remember, Sharon, when we went through yesterday, and I showed you on the tax return, and our line 150 took into account the capital gain, and then after that, we applied the, oh, you know what, actually? Total income, net income, taxable income. Yeah, I guess if we're doing the taxable income, and honestly, I think you would get this right if you put 135 or 0 on there. Yeah, you could make that argument. I could buy that. Yeah, that's good, Sharon. If you're using that as line 260. Yeah. I think both of those would actually be marked as correct. They both show a good comprehension of what's going on here. Okay. Well, so my 135, you mean, Sharon? The 270. So that's still the capital gain, right? The capital gain is 270. I should take 50%, make that to 135, and then change taxable income to 0. So that's with the lifetime capital gains exemption, Malcolm, right? Lifetime capital gains exemption allows you to deduct the whole amount of capital gain. Yeah. Because it's less than 800,000 or 860,000 or whatever. Whew, how's that? I think you mean fun, Melissa. All right. I think you spelled fun wrong. Okay, let's break there for lunch. We're a little bit into the lunch hour. But that's what I want to get away from, Sharon, right? I want you to look at a question like this and say, where can I find some marks? And there are marks to be had in a question like this, even if you're stumped by the actual starting point. Okay. The marks are there. You're not going to get all your marks unless you're really comfortable on the tax side, but the marks are there. Uh-oh, thanks, Justin. All right. I think it's not the worst idea, Sharon. Maybe you want to plug in some listening maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the exam. You mean from this question, Chris? This scenario? Yeah, we can do these ones. Yeah. Yeah, we still have to get to some multiple choice today too, so I don't want to leave that alone either. Okay. But yeah, we can do 8 and 9. All right. Yeah, lots of good questions, Melissa. I appreciate that people have questions. There's been a lot of good questions to help get us there. And yeah, we need that. All right. I'm going to just pop up a slide over the lunch hour that you can read. This is something that one of my students had sent me following his exam attempt. And I thought it was good feedback. He was a pretty methodical person, and it reinforces some of what I talk about. So I'll get that way. All right, I have 14 minutes past. We'll take call it 46 minutes. 46-minute lunch break. We'll resume on the hour. Okay, we'll see you back then. Thanks.